I'm going to sit down. One, because it's Christmas and I feel like I'm in Westlife when I'm sat on this stage and I'm quite enjoying it. But two, I'm not very well. And also, it's a really bloody hard topic. So I am going to need notes. Most of you that have seen me present before, I normally just wing it and know what I want to say. But actually, this kind of needed a bit of craft. So you guys can hear me at the back. Hopefully, we don't have a microphone either. So I won't leave this on for too long. It makes you feel a bit dizzy. But ultimately, the title of the presentation was completely intentional because it's a bloody roller coaster. Grief, in any way that you feel it, is a roller coaster, and this is what you feel like on a daily basis. This is what your insides feel like, what your mind feels like, everything feels like. And so I'm hoping that some of the things that we experience this year will help you guys as you might face it as well. Grief for us probably started about 11 years ago, because actually that's when my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. And he actually refused to believe he had either of them for the whole of the experience, because he was the most stubborn human known to man. That's the first clue of where some of my characteristics come from today that you'll hear about. But he was my favourite person in the world. There's no doubt about that. And to lose him mentally over those 10 years before he actually physically passed away was a really horrendous experience. Those years, although tough, and I could spend forever talking about the tough times, they were also filled with loads of memories, and actual different memories to the first 30 years that I'd had with him. It was all completely different, but those kind of memories and experiences now make up who I am now. I can't forget those 10 years that happened, and I am a different person because of that experience that we had. And I wanted to share, as Leona said, because I know that people have been through grief in the last few years, or at grief at some point in their life. And actually, grief is this incredibly hard thing to navigate, and it's a really solo journey, but you take lessons from the other things that people have learned, and just try and find some kind of comfort in the fact that other people are grieving, because grief is grief in any sense. You break up with a partner, you lose a pet, a relationship ends, anything that ends, there is a grieving process to it. And I think for me, my hope for today is that some of the experiences that the Kiernan family went through will kind of help some of you for any grief process that you might have. 2 trigger warnings. 1, I might cry, because I cry at anything, so very possible that I'll cry, and we do have tissues, so we're okay for that. The other trigger warning is it's a bit of a love story between a daughter and a dad, and I think that's sometimes hard if you don't have that relationship with your parents, and so I just want to put that out there as well, because that's always a tough one. The caveat to that is I'm still in the rose-tinted glasses phase. We've kind of forgotten about the teenage years where I was an absolute arsehole and he was chasing me around the house swearing at me. That's all forgotten now. We just remember the love side of it. But yeah, hopefully you guys will see something that's for you in here. So most of you will know kind of how I came to be back at McCann, but just very quickly, one day in November 2018, I'd been on a massive brunch in Dubai on the Friday, so drunk that I missed my plane. Felt very sorry for myself, getting on another plane, coming back home to Birmingham. And at this point, I was kind of coming home about every 8 weeks, or seeing my family about every 8 weeks. They were coming out to me. The only holidays they could have was with me, because Mum couldn't cope with Dad on her own. So they had a couple of breaks a year out to see me, where I was in the Middle East, and I'd come home as often as I could. And obviously, there was always this lovely little welcome committee, because he was the kind of dad that would wait until he'd seen the very last glimpse of you as you kind of walk through departures, and wait for you at arrivals, always in arrivals as well. And obviously, as the children came along, that they would be here too. This time, though, when I landed in November 2018, I walked into arrivals and he was there, and he had a newspaper in his hand, and he said to me, "Have you seen this radiator?" And it was the first time that his words had gone and his word association was gone. And I immediately, incredibly hungover still, thought, oh God, this is a big dip for us. And then I got to my sister's house, where I usually stayed when I came home, and she said, she basically told me about the meltdown he'd had in IKEA, because a stranger that he'd bumped into didn't have any gloves on and it was cold, and he shook the stranger violently, and then screamed at my sister when she tried to calm him down. And Sophie said to me, "You've got to come home. If you don't come home, I'm going to have a nervous breakdown." Fortunately, I just so happened to meet Dean, John and Rob on that Wednesday. they thankfully offered me the chance to come back here. And on the Friday, after I'd landed on the Saturday, I went back to Dubai and said, I'm going back home to Birmingham. And ultimately, that's because it takes a village. It takes a village to look after anyone with dementia or to care for someone. And I think being a carer is a label that doesn't get used enough, really. This situation as well was completely unexpected, because in 2019 I landed, just about got used to being home, and then in 2020 we went into COVID, and COVID was really the start of the end for us. He probably would have lived a few more years had we not have gone into COVID, but the world changing meant that his routine changed, and really he started to lose his mind a lot more quickly, and the decline was pretty much immediate, and that for us was, I suppose, the start of the lessons that we had to learn. There are 6 lessons in the presentation that I'll take you through. There's actually loads more, and I can only remember them because my memory is completely shoddy these days, because I started to write, because Baz talked a few weeks ago about creative output. I started to write because when we knew it was going to be the end in the February before he died in the May, I wanted to write his eulogy before he actually died, because I wanted it to come from a place of love and happiness and memories, rather than just a place of grief and hurt. So we started to write, and you can see my ramblings here kind of as we went through. And then as things got harder and heavier, I just carried on writing, and it was a really good space for me to be in. There were things that would happen along the way. The 17th of February, actually I'll go back to the 16th. 16th, I finished here at 11:15 because we were going down to see TikTok the next day. And my mum phoned me and said, "You finished work?" I was like, "Why are you phoning me this time?" She said, "Your dad's gone into hospital, but no one can find him because it's COVID and we don't know where the ambulance has gone to." So phoned around all the hospitals, eventually find him about 1 o'clock, speak to the nurse, he's settled, it's okay. Get to sleep about 2, up at 5 to be on a 6 a.m. train to London for a TikTok tissue meeting. And the doctor phones about 5:15 and she says, "Just want to update you on your dad." I say, "Okay, I'm on the train to London at the moment going to work." She went, "Okay, well, your dad's dying." I was like, "What? Now? Like, do I need to get off the train? What do you mean?" She was like, "Oh, no, not now, but it is imminent and we do need to have a conversation." I said, "Are you sure I don't need to get off the train?" "No, you're fine. We'll have a conversation this afternoon when you're back." So in a whirlwind in my mind, I carry on to TikTok, carry on to McCann London, cry on Charlene, the receptionist, who's wonderful, on floor 8. He'll look after you if ever you're crying. Bought me loads of water. Said to Dan Caputo, "You're out of the meeting now, Dan, because you've got to look after my phone in case anything goes on." Said to Joe Stevens, "You're going to have to keep bringing the tissues and the water, and we'll just kind of get through this." And obviously, the kind of writing was helpful, because as I look back and reflect on that time, actually the lesson for me that day was that going through the hardest conversation, somebody saying that to you, is absolutely heartbreaking and just unbelievable that it actually even happened to me. Probably more heartbreaking than actually the day he died, the words that it's real and it's going to happen. I still had the desire to show up for myself, to show up for McCann, to show up for the team. I still had the desire to retain the big part of who I was, which is a managing partner here, but also for life to go on, whilst also caring for him. And I had called my sister. She'd left school, she'd gone and gotten into hospital with him, and I went back in and did the night shift that night. It isn't that I didn't care about him and he still wasn't the great love of my life. It was just that there was other parts of me that kind of needed to go on. And actually, there isn't a switch you can flick. There isn't a lesson that tells you this is the way that you handle something. I think actually with this, it taught me that I could be resilient, and that actually, whilst sobbing in the reception of 135 Bishopsgate, I can also 15 minutes later be really bloody good at my job, because it was an excellent tissue meeting and I could be ace whilst sobbing. And I think really some of the lessons that we see here is about the balance of, you might have shit going on at home and still have to turn up here, and really I suppose that's what today kind of covers. So the first one is you're never alone, and it kind of focuses on what happened here, because I never felt totally alone in my situation, despite living by myself and my sister and I and my mum and I having different experiences. And it might kind of sound obvious that family and friends show up and people show up for you, because they do, and people are wonderful and they're kind and they're generous. But sometimes it's the little things that just mean the most. And this one really is a bit of a shout out to Becca Philby, and I don't know whether Becca's actually here. She's I think she's somewhere around making Christmas decorations. But Dad was with me Thursday to Sunday during lockdowns whilst I still worked full time because Mum couldn't care for him by herself. And Becca Philbin sat there patiently whilst he sang at the top of his voice, "Do you hear the people sing?" repeatedly from Les Miserables, because that gave him comfort.
It was amazing.
June Hacker, oh, there she is. Thank you, Becca. June Hacker sat there politely whilst he sat next to me on a bench, cuddled up to me, whilst he continually told her to clear off because she was boring him. There was then the time when 5 minutes before we present to the cross-country board for the first time about why McCann had been appointed, that my mum phones me and says, "Your dad's missing," and no one could find him. And I had to phone the team and say, "You're on your own, guys. I've got to go," and literally rush out the door because the amazing human that was had made his way to his favourite place on earth, Villa Park, and had got all the way there on a bloody bus without a bus pass or anything else, and it took us 2 hours to find him. And it's easy to feel kind of embarrassed, annoyed, sad, frustrated about all those situations, and it's easy to live in kind of the negative because that's quite a consuming experience. But actually, I always worked really hard to try and see the positives. And Becca saying it was amazing, as she did many times during the call when we were talking about learning and development, just really kind of went to show me that I wasn't on my own, and there were people that were willing to be calm and kind of compassionate and comfortable in a situation that I wasn't comfortable in, and that made a massive difference to me. And I think I'd always been very open about my situation. You guys will know I'm an open book, but the people that were there during COVID, particularly when he was physically present in the house as well, made a massive difference to kind of how hard this was. So whilst people were gorgeous with their gestures, just sitting on a call whilst I was also entertaining an 80-year-old who was going out of his mind, literally, meant a lot, and showed me that I was never alone, and that was really special. The second one is a kind of a bigger lesson and a soppy one in that it's all love. I started working with a coach that Ollie introduced me to in April 2020, when I said to him, "How on earth am I going to do this? How on earth am I going to be managing partner, do the bloody quick fit pitch and everything else, and have my dad in my house Thursday to Sunday?" I just couldn't work it out. And I'm really glad I did, because lots of people are so kind and they'll say to you, "Oh, my boyfriend's dad's granddad's dog's pet parrots, so and so had dementia, and I totally know what you're going through," because they've seen it through a lens and they've experienced it. And that thought and that wanting to express empathy comes from a really genuine place, and it's lovely. But the fact is, when you've had to clean up 3 bathroom incidents and you've had to work on a pitch whilst cooking all the meals and make sure that your team felt safe and secure during COVID and bring in the revenue and all of those things at the same time, nobody can understand that, because your experience is your own experience. So third party help I would highly recommend always, because they can give you an insight and perspective that's compassionate and constructive without the kind of attachment that they've got to the situation that you're going through as well. And they'll also just help you with some coping mechanisms. And one day, feeling incredibly frustrated about the fact that we watched Notting Hill for the 800th time because it was his favourite film, and every time we watched it he would say, "Oh God, she loves him and he doesn't love her back, and what's she going to do, and now where is she going? Oh, and she's bought that painting from her house." And every time the whole narrative comes out and you're like, yeah, like we're watching it for the first time every time. And she said to me, "Why do you watch it with him?" I said, "Because it calms him." She was like, "And why is it important that it calms him?" "Because he's bloody annoying otherwise. I'm running around the house after him and I've got stuff to do." And she's like, "And why else is it important that it calms him?" "Because I want him to be calm." "And why do you want him to be calm?" "Because he's losing his mind and that's really scary and it's horrifying for him." "Okay, and why do you want him to be calm and not be scared about all these things?" "Because I love him." And she was like, "Then watch fucking Notting Hill, because you are watching it because you love him, and there is nothing wrong with that." And that lesson for me helped a lot on the days that were hard, when you are cleaning up the bathroom incidents and you are doing things that you would never expect that you need to do for your father or for your family. The fact that you're doing it because you love someone, I think massively helps. And the simplicity, I'm a very simple human, the simplicity of the lesson that it's all love just makes things a bit easier. The third one is a bit miserable, sounds a bit miserable, but my God, it can always get worse. 11 days after my dad died, my granddad died, and my mum lost her husband and her dad, We had 2 funerals to arrange. There was another person to grieve. I mean, Christ alive, what a stroke of bad luck. And it isn't meant to be depressing or kind of upsetting. Obviously these are family photos, by the way, and I'm the cute baby. But it isn't meant to be kind of depressing. It's just the reality that sometimes things can get harder when you really think it can't. And the main lesson that I will take from that is that you always have more to give than you think you do. When I thought I had nothing more to give, all of a sudden my granddad died, and we were still doing the East Midlands railway pitch, and we still did it all. We planned the 2 funerals, we won the pitch. The only thing that I had to do, for me, I wore a brighter dress, brighter lipstick and higher heels, because I didn't have as much in the tank to give on that day. The fluorescent pink dress, wasn't it, Leona? Enormously bright. But sometimes when you can't quite fill the space, you find other ways to fill the space. The reality is it can always get harder and it can always be worse, but you do find ways through it, even when you think that you can't. And you look back, I mean, it's a bloody unbelievable situation, really. But since that happened, I have more time and more space to film, and I can step into that space again. And there's something, I suppose, positive about that, because I have wonderful and wholesome experiences, like getting to coach these under 12s on how to avoid breaking themselves and feeling in agony as a 40-year-old ex-rugby player. You learn through all the tough times that your heart and your mind and your body and your resilience and your strength can stretch and can move into a million different ways. And I think the hard lessons of Christ, it can always get worse, just give you so much more capacity to give afterwards. When you have the energy to give, you know, I started this a few weeks ago. There's no way that I could have done it straight afterwards. It took me time to settle back in, but there's positives to come from the fact that sometimes it gets worse. Another positive is that comfort, and you have no idea how you're going to comfort yourself, but it can come in many forms. I thought I would be bereft when it happened. I thought you wouldn't be able to get me off the floor, which didn't happen. And I still haven't sobbed. I told Mitch earlier, I still haven't sobbed, which amazes me, because he was, as you can see, I absolutely adored him from the day that I was born. There's no way that he wasn't my favourite human. I'm still amazed that I haven't sobbed. I also thought that closure and comfort would come in the funeral, and I thought I'd finish the funeral and be like, okay, that was something there. And it amazed me that the funeral didn't feel like it was for me. It was for all the other people that were grieving, and actually for the 10 years that he was dying. You know, people would come up to you and be like, oh, I saw your dad and my friend's gone and he's not there anymore, and that's really hard. And you want to comfort them, but the more time you spend comforting other people, the less time you're actually working it out for yourself. And then the funeral comes and you sat in that weird ass bloody car like you should be going to the Oscars or something, and there's no water in there, and you realise I should have bought a hip flask because this is going to be rough. And you're kind of going through all this stuff, and actually you're not really, personally, I didn't find closure from that experience. And I remember being sat in the crematorium and just looking at the coffin thinking, there's no bloody way this can be over. I am not ready for this to be over whatsoever. I wanted to press pause. Just, you know, it just went too fast, and there wasn't enough time. And very much like agency life, they run on time. They were ready for the next slot, and the next family had to come in. And actually, I realised that I wasn't in control of any of that. I wasn't in control of any of the things that were happening at that point, and that was really hard. The things that you can control is my lesson and recommendation to everybody, is that's what you focus on as much as you can. Grief is incredibly lonely. Incredibly lonely. Not even my sister, who I'm very close to, we can't even identify with each other's grief because it's different, and we had a different relationship with him. The flowers, the cards, the messages, the calls, food parcels, the gorgeous things that people do, they kind of fill the void, and they fill you with warmth, and they're lovely. The thing that helped me most is the memories. We've always taken a million photos. We've had a lot of family experiences together, holidays, concerts, you know, football, family celebrations, and there was a lot of comfort in that. And obviously I love to kiss him from when I was a baby till when that was the most recent one in 2021. There's the comfort came in the memories and in other people's and in other people's stories as well, and it still does. It also came in the other things that I could control. I couldn't watch anything new at all, so I rewatched Twilight. I mean, my God, I used to love that. What a pile of shite. But I rewatched Twilight because there was 5 of them and there was hours, and I already knew what was going to happen, and it wasn't the real world. So whilst my ears were ringing and my body was vibrating from the pure shock and adrenaline, actually I could just watch that in total comfort. Don't try and learn new recipes or try to cook anything new. Disaster. You can't follow instructions. Don't try and drive anywhere new. I would be looking at the road thinking, don't know why I'm here. Absolutely no idea where I'm going or why I'm here. Waze was absolutely a friend. Multitasking used to be my superpower. It's gone. Absolutely lost. Don't know where it's gone to, but it doesn't exist anymore. So I think that there were things that you learned that you couldn't be the same version of yourself as you used to be, and actually the comfort in what you could control is helpful. The other lesson that I learned retrospectively is that I should have asked someone to sit with me, because I live on my own, and you don't want to put on people because you don't know what to say and you don't know what on earth. Your head is literally up your arse. You have no idea what is going on. But I wish that somebody would have sat with me and I would have put someone through the pain of Twilight, because actually the presence in the room would have been really helpful. And that's kind of one of the retrospective lessons that I've got. But the rest of them was about, really, the comfort will come, but it will come in the things that you can control, I think. The other comfort, and the biggest one, comes from gratitude. There's a famous therapist, Dr. Stutz, I think I'm saying it right, who says that gratitude is the only emotion that can cut through negative thoughts. And apparently you can't feel sad or angry when you're grateful. I was really emotional yesterday. I went home, I cried all the way home, and then sat on my sofa and cried whilst I went through this, probably feeling a bit overwhelmed that I was going to do it and a bit of the reality. And a friend phoned just by chance to say, just wanted to check in. And I've known him for nearly 30 years and properly talked to me off the little mini cliff I was on at that moment in time. And we had a great chat. And the gratitude I had for him choosing that moment to phone got rid of all the anger and all the sadness and all the frustration and everything else that I was feeling. And I think gratitude, more than anything, I would genuinely say, is the only thing that stops my heart from hurting. The love that you receive is gorgeous and it is so well received. But gratitude for the relationship I had with him, and gratitude for the things that happened since, the things that happened before, just any gratitude really that you can find, I think is genuinely the only thing that stops the real painful days. That said, lesson number 5 is that amongst all this gratitude and all this comfort and all these lessons, you will 100% lose your shit. There is no doubt about it. Whether you lose it in the run up to, in the just afterwards, or years afterwards, you will absolutely lose your shit. Even I think the coolest and calmest people, which I am not one of, will find that either they lose their temper, or they lose a bit of themselves, or they just lose their mind a little bit, I think. I heard a psychologist describe losing a parent as hideous, and I think that's a perfect way to describe it. It is really hideous. The reason that you are on this planet no longer exists, and there is something hideous that happens to you when that happens. And as much as I am so unbelievably grateful, and I feel lucky beyond words to have had the 40 years that I did have with him, it's still hideous. It's still hideous, even though I had that. I'm kind of conscious of standing here saying I had 40 years of love and that I still feel hideous. It feels kind of difficult to say that in some ways, but it does. I don't think I can kind of hide from that emotion, and that emotion does trigger me to lose my shit sometimes. Uncertainty is really difficult for me. I think after so many years of uncertainty, any uncertainty now I find really difficult, and that can trigger a reaction in me that is unexpected. And I've got better at managing it, and I've worked with my coach to try and manage it, because it's not fair on you guys. Anyone that was on the Kenko pitch and had me in a feral mood one day in a meeting, it was never intentional. I was just triggered at that point and I didn't know how to manage it. The most important thing, I think, to remember about losing your shit is that you've got to be kind to yourself about it. And the reason that there's a Lion King picture here is because I realised whilst watching the wonderful production of the Lion King in London that it was a story about a child's relationship with a dad who had died. What an idiot. Who goes to London to see that and pays all that money and then realises as they're sat there in the theatre. And then I looked to my right as I felt this wave of emotion come up, that the guy next to me was there with his pregnant wife, who was also in floods of tears because she had whatever else was going on with her. She had hormone emotion being driven as well. And so I'm trying to keep it in my throat because I'm thinking if this comes out, this could be, I could be on YouTube at this stage, like could come out as an absolute growl. And so I sat there, keeping it in, swallowing it in all the time, trying to be great. And then came out of the theatre when it finished and threw up all over the pavement because the emotion had just been stuck in my throat for so long. And those moments, I definitely lost my shit in that moment in time. No one wants to throw up in the middle of busy London in the middle of the summer. But you will lose your shit. And I think you can only just keep working at getting better at managing those triggers, at getting better at managing that situation and trying to be kind to yourself with it, because I just couldn't help it at that moment in time. My mind wasn't in the right space to realise that Lion King was about that, and that's okay. And it wasn't okay that I was very snappy with my teammates on a pitch, but I apologised to them, and that's okay because I recognised that it wasn't okay, and I tried to be better next time. And the last lesson is the hardest one to say out loud, really. But you do learn to embrace the end. And it's the hardest thing to say out loud because I really actually did lose my favourite human this year. And the reality is you have to take time to sit with that emotion, and you have to move with it and evolve with it and kind of move into whatever space or shape that emotion takes up, because I think my personal belief is that you have to walk through an emotion to kind of get to understand that emotion and to learn how you're going to live with it. And the life goes on part actually came quite quickly, because it was about 3 weeks afterwards. I was seeing the Killers in Coventry Arena, and it had been postponed a number of times because of COVID, and Manic Street Preachers were supporting them, and one of his favourite songs was Designed for Life. It was always on in our kitchen on a Saturday night when he was cooking a curry. Couldn't sing for shit, but he would give it a good belt, and music was a big part of our family. So hearing them sing a Design for Life in my first stadium concert since COVID was a bit of a hallelujah moment, really, because whilst the hole that he left was impossible to fill, I have all these memories and all these joyous things to remember, and there is no way that he would want me to be sat in the moments that were tough and were hard. He would want us to be celebrating the great bits. And so that's why I'm here in a very festive blouse and a festive jumper. I'm talking to you at a wonderful time of the year about something that's hard and tough and sad and ugly and makes me cry. I'm not the only person at McCann. I'm not the only person, in my personal community. I'm certainly not the only person in the world that hasn't lost someone or is going to be spending a Christmas without someone this year. And that's hard. That reality is hard. Christmas was hard for us because my dad, or Big Tone, we used to call him, he was 5'7". He was not big in character, not big in height. He used to call us rampant raving Christmas lovers because we are a bit Christmas wild in our family. Very much like my friend Mark Kinsey over there, counting down from about 1st of June as to when Christmas is actually coming. And we loved Christmas, but probably for the last 7 or 8 years, Christmas was entirely about him. What would his mood be? How tired would he be? When would he need to nap? How could we coordinate the children having a great time whilst we also needed to manage him? What did we do about numbers? Where could we take him? Where wouldn't we take him? And then here I am in 2020, New Year's Eve, taking the beautiful Victoria Beckham eyeshadow I'd bought for New Year's Eve, all glammed up and ready to go. And he'd collapsed and needed to go into hospital. And actually, he was a right bloody menace. Again, characteristic I share, but he wouldn't settle for anybody at all in the hospital. It would take about 4 staff to look after him whenever he was in, and our NHS doesn't have anywhere near that luxury. So with dementia clauses, we'd be allowed to go and stay with him. And I think because we were pretty kindred spirits, he probably thought I was a lunatic that would break him out, because he'd always say to me, "You'll get me out, won't you?" And I say, "Yeah, Dad, we just need another half an hour." And so he'd calm for me and we'd stay. So I ended up in New Year's Eve on a bloody men's ward, absolutely gross. Thank God I had lost my sense of taste and smell through COVID, because it was vile, absolutely vile. But we spent New Year's Eve on a men's ward at City Hospital in Birmingham. And I'm glad that I could be there. I'm glad that I could be there for him, and I'm glad that I could, you know, still be pulling silly faces and posting it on Instagram. But the fact is, he would never have wanted that. Of all the years that he was with us, he absolutely loved us tremendously. And there's no way that he would have wanted us to have given up 7-8 years of Christmas to actually be thinking about him and putting him first. So the reason that you learn how to embrace the end, the reason that I'm here talking to you about the fact that I've learned to embrace the end, is that this will be the first Christmas that we get to put ourselves first. And that's hard to feel happy about that, but also important that we feel happy about that, because we gave a lot over the last few years of his life to him, and now it's about investing back in us and what we can do. So really, that's the final lesson. It's kind of harder than I thought it would be summarising all of this. And Duncan Slater came over to me yesterday and said, "Good luck." And I was like, "Oh, I feel the same as I did the day before his funeral," which was, why on earth did I say that I bloody speak about this? Why did I do it? But selfishly, I'm kind of hoping it'll be a bit cathartic and will be a nice entry point into Christmas for me. But more importantly, as Leona said, I think it's important that you guys know, whilst we've brought some great business into this agency this year, and we'll hit margin and hopefully hit realisation, and we'll hit our revenue target. I've been through all this shit at the same time, and we're still able to be good at my job. And I think it's important for you guys to know that it's perfectly okay not to be okay, and still show up as you need to. So that's it. That's me.